circumcised how many times in the world at the moment?
Subscribe.
Oh well, been around the world several times.
Yes, yes.
Inspiring people, children, educators, with his enthusiasm about storytelling. As you can see here, he has visited over 30 countries, both telling stories and training teachers through the British Council. And basically, I would like to emphasize his last quote where he says, storytelling is a way of actually helping learning because it makes learning memorable and it shows the sound of English in performance. So I'd like you all to give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, George, for the welcome. Kalispera, maybe I should say, to start with. I hesitate because I have little Greek. My partner worked in one of the Greek islands many years ago at an animal hospital, and she was even worse, if possible, at languages than I was. She was continually confused between Kalimera and Kalimari. So every morning she would cycle to work shouting squid, squid to people, and they would, goodness knows what they thought or replied. Thank you, George, for the introduction. I get quite a lot of introductions because I do a lot of speaking, and I'm just checking there's a thumb up at the back and that you can still hear me. Thank you. I do a lot of speaking. I do some training courses, I do comparing, I do one-off talks, I do storytelling. You'll notice the common factor here. I am, to borrow a piece of English slang, a gob on a stick. So I do a lot of speaking and I get a lot of introductions. Some of them I particularly cherish. I was introduced many years ago by a head teacher before I was to speak to the parents at the school. And he started by saying, sometimes, he said, you wonder why people have the jobs they do. And I thought, God, what's going to happen next, you know? I can't remember exactly what happened next, but at the end of the session, he said, so you see, that's why Mr. Williams is the children's librarian. So I suppose something vaguely useful must have happened in between. I also enjoyed the introduction. This is Mr. Williams, the librarian who has agreed to come and talk to us. Clearly they had combed the entire library and found the one that capitulated. I'm going to do some moving about to make it difficult for your guy at the back. I do apologise. Your convention is called Back to Basics. And I can't think of many things more basic than stories. Second only to food, perhaps. Stories are a basic human need. They are how we make sense of the world, how we entertain, how we pass on experience, how we break the news, and how we record history. Stories have existed as long as humans have existed. Okay, there was not in the past quite that same antique, that old-time flavour, back in prehistoric days, maybe. I remember seeing a cartoon once which showed a caveman and his little boy, and he was saying, once upon a time, well, last Tuesday actually, but now we have once upon a time, and those words, like many other story openings, take you back and pull on something quite essential inside us. This session is called Bringing It Alive. And I often use this title because it works in two ways. Firstly, if you include stories in your English language teaching, I think they can bring alive the subject itself. I visit many countries, as you have heard, and in many of those countries the teaching of English is very exercise-based. It is drills in grammar and barking back declining verbs and so on. And if you make space for stories, they could really light up a lesson. But the second meaning of bringing alive is that I think if you put a bit of drama, a bit of expression, if you put your heart and soul into reading or telling a story, you can bring that story alive. You can, in the case of a book, for example, lift the words off the page. I remember reading a book recently by a storyteller who said, it is impossible to go over the top. You know, so you can exaggerate, you can make it larger than life. I have a library background, as you might have heard. I feel the interloper today in an audience full of teachers, or largely teachers. Therefore, I am perhaps less concerned with how the story can serve the teaching. My background is children's books. And because of that, if I have a focus, it's reading for pleasure. It's enjoyment, it's stories for fun. And I'm forever saying to teachers, make time just to read some stories. It's not always a case of, we're going to have a story, and then we're all going to write our own version. You know, because sometimes a little cloud, you know, hovers over the head, doesn't it? I think we need more examples of adults just enjoying stories if we want children to leave school and continue to want stories. I use stories from all sorts of places, and in this session I'll be adding stories every so often. And I might add them from a book, and I might add them from memory. And I'm afraid there may be occasional joining in. The doors have been locked. No, not really. But some of the things I do in schools, just for example, I will do traditional storytelling from memory. Sometimes I will use picture books, particularly if there is an audience of parents, because it's a great role model for them to see how you can bring a book story alive. I also do a lot of poetry, and I'm going to put one or two poems in today. And the last thing I do, particularly with older children, is to use little extracts of stories. Maybe an exciting opening, you know, a dramatic beginning of a story, or an exciting part early in the story. And then I say, and if you want to find out what happens, you read the rest for yourself. Now, I'm mentioning that last thing because, in a way, there are a couple of apologies here. The first thing is this session is billed as early years, and that was partly my error because I intended it to be for all ages. So I've added one or two examples for older children. But if I don't add enough, talk to me later on, either in any questions at the end or through the conference, because I'm here throughout the weekend. Second apology, I have taken out one or two bits and pieces from this session because I need to run a workshop on the more practical aspects. It's not going to stop me reading stories, though. This is a picture book story. Here, by the way, is a moral for you. Don't use a picture book with a large audience, because they won't be able to see. I don't know if you can see that, even at the back. Oh, very good. You may just be being polite. This is a muskrat. I didn't know what a muskrat was, but I looked it up in a book, which is another use for books, really, isn't it? I could look it up on the internet as well. I don't mind. Once there was a muskrat sitting quietly in a tree. Along came a tiger. What's the tiger going to do to the muskrat? Eat it. Okay, you know how irritating teachers are. There's always one question which is easy, and then there's a follow-up one. So here's the follow-up one. Why? How do you know? Hungry? How do you know it's hungry? Looks hungry. Some people say because it's a lot bigger and big animals eat small animals. Does that work for you? I'll tell you what adults don't often notice, but children do. He's got a napkin on. A serviette. Children are growing up in a very visual world, yeah? They are seeing movies, DVDs, TV, posters, magazines, pictures, pictures, pictures. They are often, when it comes to visual literacy, sharper than you are. You may miss this. If I show that to children, they will spot that early on. I'm going to eat you, little muskrat, said the tiger, just testing the echo. Wait, said the muskrat. I want to tell you a story. Okay, said the tiger, but make it quick. Once upon a time, said the muskrat, there was a frog sitting by a pond, and a big shark came up through the water and said, I'm going to eat you, little frog. Wait, said the frog, I want to tell you a story. Okay, said the shark, but make it quick. Once upon a time, said the frog, there was a lizard sitting on a rock, and a big snake came along and said, I'm going to eat you, little lizard. Wait, said the lizard. Sorry, all my small animals got the same voice. Wait, said the lizard, I want to tell you a story. Okay, said the snake, but make it quick. Once upon a time, said the lizard, there was a fly sitting on a web, and a big spider came along and said, I'm going to eat you, little fly. Wait, said the fly, I want to tell you a story. I don't want to hear it, said the spider. And the spider ate the fly. Oh, you are soft. Some of you are going, oh. And I, said the tiger, sorry, the guy at the back's headphones. I'm going to eat you, little muskrat. Wait, shouted the muskrat. There's more. You see, the lizard ate the spider. And then the snake ate the lizard. And the frog ate the snake. And then the shark ate the frog. Well, what happened then? So Dick was getting quite interested, isn't he? He's forgotten he's hungry for a moment. That's what stories do, they pull you in. What happened then? Said the tiger. And then the crocodile ate the tiger, said the muskrat. What crocodile? Said the tiger. Come on, you can see that. And the muskrat got away. It's quite useful sometimes to be able to tell stories, isn't it? That's like Scheherazade, but with animals, really. Why do we tell stories? Let me give you a few reasons. Some of these you may know already, or they may be obvious, but here they are anyway. Stories help with language and speech. I think you can always tell a child who has been read to. Not if you agree. Or maybe a child who has started to read for themselves. And you can tell it in all sorts of ways. Maybe they sit for a bit longer, their concentration span. Maybe they're more confident at putting their hands up. And stories will give you a vocabulary that you wouldn't otherwise hear. Children grow up hearing the language of home, school, street, playground, TV, but don't, unless you make room for it, learn book language. And that has its own richness, its own rhythms. My son, who is 35, I think, next month, both his parents were librarians. Think of that. Poor kid, you know, he didn't stand a chance, really. He was read to relentlessly from when he was still damp. Shutting him up was the problem. He was about 10 years old. And in the top of the house, we had a very small cupboard. It was low, it was about this size. It was just big enough for the folding bed to go in, the Z bed, you know, like a... Okay. James wanted to have this cupboard for a chemistry laboratory. I told him he couldn't. So he went out in the garden and sulked. And then I got this letter through the letterbox. It says, Dad, I am out at the bottom of the garden. I usually would have given up by now, but what pains me is that there is a room that would do perfectly. It disturbs me that you place the Z bed above my interests. He didn't become a lawyer. I'm going to stay in the garden until you talk reasonably. From James. P.S. If I come in before that, I haven't given up, it'll just be because I'm cold. P.P.S. I still love you. P.P.P.S. I know the attic cupboard is small, but you don't know what my requirements are. Thus, single-handedly, I ruined the career of what would have been the world's greatest chemist. Visual development as well, you know, which is why I've got some picture books here. And the more picture books are the more pictures, generally, that children see, the more chances they have of seeing how many different ways the world can be portrayed. They're learning about art and the differences in styles. Developing other skills as well. Stories help with things like motor skills, you know? Joining in together, clapping, doing actions. The research on telling children stories early shows that they are not just ahead in language learning, but in maths and physical education as well. Experience as well. You know, stories are a way of shared experience. There are topics which, of course, you can explore in a story, which can be safely explored. And at the end of it, you can say, oh, that was frightening, wasn't it? But because you were all there, and because you were safe and with a trusted adult, you can experience things secondhand. To take a Greek metaphor, this just occurred to me. I remember reading many years ago a book on children's stories, and the writer likened this point to Perseus and the Medusa. You remember her? She had a bad hair day all the time. And if you looked at her, very much as if I were to look at Ken, it would turn you to stone. This is why I'm focusing this way. And you'll also recall, why am I telling you this? You know this, I hope you know this. So he polished his shield and he looked sideways and stabbed her that way. Now, the writer simply said, stories are like that. They can help you face something safely secondhand. Emotional development as well, but above all fun, about pleasure. This is where they come into their own. It was Strabo, the Greek mathematician, philosopher, who said pleasure acts as a charm to incite the learning. You could add other ones. You could add imagination, because if you don't use picture books, the most powerful pictures are the ones in your head. It develops a bond of affection between the teller and the audience. And in the case of parents, an intimacy. Sharing a story as a parent is an excuse for a long hug. They can bring objects, people, to life. You know, I was talking to Andrew about the wonderfully rich prehistory you have around you here. And you can imagine, I don't know, a bowl being talked about in a dry way. This is 4th century BC, notice the difference here, you know. But you could also imagine that same bowl being interpreted differently. I wonder who made this. Was he famous for his bowls? Maybe at night time they would gather around the fire, and into this bowl they would pour, do you know what I mean? So you have that story approach, which I'm saying this because it actually affects all subjects, not just language learning. Values as well, truths, warnings, morals, you know, maybe I should be kinder, that sort of thing. And those sort of things, I contend, are best passed on casually. I think children are very aware of when they're being preached to. And to finish a story by saying, and what did we learn from this? I think is more likely to make them reject it. It'll go in, don't you worry, if you're doing enough. They record history. And they also spread understanding. You can't fight someone when you know their story. We've got different kinds of story material. Books, as I've mentioned, picture books, or short stories from older collections of books. From memory, it could be a learnt folk tale, or it could be anything which was memorised that you remember maybe from your own childhood. And I should say at this point that I'm going to do two little paired discussions. I meant to give you a warning of this. Here it comes. The first one is going to be turning to someone next to you and talking about your first experience of stories. Could be a parent, grandparent, older brother, sister, or even maybe your first teacher who made stories come alive to you. Start thinking about that. The other paired discussion, if we have time, will be swapping a story. I don't mean telling a whole story to your partner, the person next to you, but you can start thinking about stories that work well for you. Which one would you reach for? Which is a surefire favourite? It could be story building. Some storytellers will do this with a group of children. We're going to have a story. What should it be about? Will it be an animal or a human? An animal, okay, right. Which animal will it be? A rabbit, okay? It's a story about a rabbit. Now, where does the rabbit live? You know, what problem does the rabbit have? So you build up the story using, in my case, the children's comments. Family stories, we all have those, I think. You know, the day the car broke down. The day Granny sat on her glasses. You know, there are little stories like that get passed down. I say the car broke down. My parents always used to talk of an occasion when their car broke down and my father had to get, it was boiling over. You know, the radiator was boiling. So he had to go to get some water from the little stream which he fetched in his hat. And this was passed down as family mythology. Everyday events, you know. On my way here, I'll tell you what happened, you know. We recount things, and you could do that on a daily basis to your students. You may not want to tell them everything that's happened on the way to school, obviously. But it's another source of stories. Digital storytelling, either the DIY model on the web or projecting a purchased CD. Web-based storytelling, a site like Storyline Online, for example, where actors and good speakers are sharing stories. Or World Stories, another site well worth looking at, World Stories. Or those web-based storytelling tools to create stories, like Storybird, which some of you will know about, or Plotagon, I think is another one. You could be using a story sack, where you have objects that support the telling of the story. Or a story box, which I would define as a box of objects that inspire a story. It could have a shoe, a letter, an umbrella, and the story comes from that. Here's our first chance to get you talking to a neighbour. Just talk to the person next to you. I know what you're doing now. You're looking carefully, thinking, am I with her or with her? You're thinking, there's only 3 in our row, what do I do? Turn to someone near you. Just swap your first experiences of story. Parent, grandparent, older child, teacher. What was the first one you really remember? What did you feel like? Have a couple of minutes. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm rather sorry to break that up, because I hope it was a pleasant memory, was it? That early experience of, oh, this is good, I quite like this, and I'm following this, because stories need to pull you along, which is why I'm always saying to teachers when I train, don't let the story sag. Sometimes I have teachers, you know, when I'm working with teachers, then they will read the text, and then they will say, and what are these? And what do you think this is? And what colour are those? So the whole double page becomes like a quiz. You know, each page is a test. Now, obviously, if a child says, what's that? Or asks you any question, then of course you will answer it. But please, let the book let it explode in the head first. If it's a good story, you'll go back to it. So maybe the second, third, or ninth time, you could then talk about it all if you like. A teacher said to me once, it wasn't this book, it was another book, and they said, where's that picture book you read? It was really good for conjunctions. I said, it's a bloody story. Sorry, I said, it's a story. Give the story a chance. Thank you for using your brains a moment ago. Here is a reward. This is a very short story. It's a story, or an adaptation by the English storyteller Taffy Thomas, of a story which is sometimes longer. It's the easiest story I know to remember. You will be able to remember this story tonight. You'll be able to try it out on an unsuspecting husband, partner, wife. Little do they know what is coming. It's called Why Dog Lives with Man. It is one of those stories which tries to explain things. You know, why the elephant has a trunk, how the leopard got his spots. In French-speaking countries, they're sometimes called pourquoi stories, why stories. This is to show how it is that in many countries dogs live with us as pets. A long time ago, Dog was lonely. So Dog went to see Hare, like a rabbit, but bigger. Dog went to see Hare, and he said, hey, Hare, you and me, you and me, we could be friends. And Hare said, okay, we'll give it a go. We'll give it a go. So all day long they hunted together, looking for food. And all night long they lay down together, side by side. But in the middle of the night, Dog woke up and he howled. Oh. Hey, said Hare, don't do that. Because if you do, you might wake up Wolf and he'll come and get us both. Ah, thought Dog. Well, if Hare is frightened of Wolf, maybe Wolf is the strongest one. So the next day, Dog went to see Wolf. And Dog said, hey, Wolf, hey, you and me, you and me. We could be friends. And Wolf said, okay, we'll give it a go. So, can you help me with your hand? All day long, all day long they hunted together. All night long, they lay down together side by side. But in the middle of the night, are you ready for this? Dog woke up and he howled. Very polite. You'll improve as we go. Hey, said Wolf, don't do that. Because if you do, you might wake up Bear and he'll come and get us both. Ah, thought Dog. Well, if Wolf is scared of Bear, maybe Bear is the strongest one. So the next day, Dog went to see Bear. Said, hey, Bear, you and me, you and me. I don't know why I do this, I just do. You and me, we could be friends. And Bear said, okay, we'll give it a go. So, you got your hands ready? All day long they hunted together. All night long they lay down together side by side. But in the middle of the night, Dog woke up and he howled. Oh, you're getting better. Hey, said Bear, don't do that. It's Welsh Bear, I think. Don't do that, because if you do, you might wake up Man and he'll come and get us both. Oh, I thought Dog, well, if Bear is scared of Man, maybe Man's the strongest one. So the next day, Dog went to see Man. And Dog said, hey, Man, you and me. capricious, isn't it, you know? Fair weather friend. That's a nice thing about storytelling. You get all sorts of idiom and stuff chucked in, colloquialisms, yeah? And man said, okay, we'll give it a go. So, last time, are you ready? All day long they hunted together, all night long they lay down together side by side. But in the middle of the night, dog woke up and he howled. Hey, said man. Hey, that's good. Yes, you do that sometimes. Yes, because if you do that sometimes, you'll scare away hares and wolves and bears and maybe robbers, burglars. Yeah, you do that sometimes. And if you do, I'll give you some food and you can stay with me. And that is how dog came to live with man. One way in which that is the easiest story to remember is this. You've all got a hand. Your thumb is the dog, yeah? So dog goes to see, who was first? Hare, and then wolf, bear, man, each time, hunt, sleep, howl, and then at the end man says, good idea. Now you may use different words, you may use more words when you retell it, but if you remember that, I think you could tell that tonight. And that's the lovely thing about stories like that, folk tales, stories from memory, because they are a gift. These obviously have a price tag. How do stories help particularly with language learning? I think, and I suspect that you suspect this, that stories are something which children naturally need and naturally enjoy. Stories are fun. Stories give a break amidst what might be exercise-driven learning. Stories help learning because they're memorable. You can remember something in a story form. And there's those 3 R's, isn't there, of rhyme, rhythm, repetition. You know, run as fast as you can. You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man. There's a little rhyme in the middle of the story. Rhythm, you know, he walked and he walked and he walked. He went deeper and deeper and deeper into the forest. And then, in a clearing, and your voice could slow down and stop. Repetition, we've already talked about repetition. And obviously, too much repetition in boring series of books is a bad thing, but naturally an element of repetition keeps the story together, helps the teller keep on track, and gives an opportunity for the audience to join in. Storytellers, as I said a moment ago, use natural language, not flowery literary language. They put in colloquialisms, slang, proverbs, sayings, and it's an opportunity to hear English in performance. And that particularly applies to countries where the language pattern may be quite different. If you go to the Far East, for example, languages are much more stress-free and there is not the same sort of rhythm in the language. English is naturally a rhythmic language. It's typically iambic. I walked along the road one day. It's the heartbeat. And you can pick up little things like that when you hear English performed. Choosing a story is obviously important. It's something which is going to represent the success or failure of your session. Not all stories, printed stories, are suitable. I often say to people, when they have a collection of, say, 30 stories, read through, but be prepared because there might not be one that you want to read. Read some more. Because eventually you'll find a story that you'll feel strongly about, that you're enthusiastic about. A story, as storytellers would put it, that wants you to tell it. Don't worry if you read a lot of stories, but you can't find one that's yours. Keep going, because you will. And the books I'm reading and the stories I'm telling are ones that I like. And I'll put them over better because of that. Some stories, picture book stories, have pastel colours, lots of detail. They don't work with a big audience. Some of them are just to share, a parent and a child. The UK children's author Bernard Ashley said, the nicest thing about a picture book is that it goes over 2 laps. So remember that they have that purpose too. But there are others that are really great for big audience sessions. So pick and choose. There are some stories that you might not alter the text of at all. One night, we take a look at Where the Wild Things Are, you know, Maurice Sendak's book. I don't think it would be almost sacrilege to alter a word. That's a perfect text about Max. One night Max wore his wolf seat and made mischief of one kind or another. And his mother told him, "Wild thing!" And Max said, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without any supper. That very night in Max's room, a forest grew and grew and grew. It's an almost perfect text. Equally, there are some that you might want to change to suit your style or the audience. So feel free to use your judgment about which is best. Think about the abilities of the group. But at the same time, think about building your own little repertoire of stories. And remember, we're going to be asking you to swap a story in a moment. Remember what the children have already heard. Your next story might build on that. Remember that if you've got a session with 2 or more stories, you can vary the pace of those stories. There's a story I sometimes use, a picture book story called Shh. And I would always use that at the end of a session, because it has a brilliant twist at the end, and it would be very hard to get the children down again if that was in the middle of a session. And, you know, there are stories that suit different times. I want to say a little word about how to make stories interactive. But before I do that, we're going to have that second paired discussion. No, we're going to have a poem first, because you are very good at joining in. So I think you can do it again. Can you put up one hand? Come on, you can do this. Excellent, look at that. Looks as though you all want to leave the room. Can your hand copy my hand? Oh yes, that's very good. Keep going. Here comes the poem. This is the hand that touched the frost, that froze my tongue and made it numb. This is the hand that cracked the nut that went in my mouth and never came out. This is the hand that slid round the bath to find the soap that wouldn't float. This is the hand on my hot water bottle. You probably don't use them here. On my hot water bottle, meant to warm my bed, but got lost instead. Where's it gone? This is the hand that held the bottle, that let go the soap, that cracked the nut, that touched the frost. This is the hand that never gets lost. So don't forget poetry. There's a lot of useful and equally memorable words in that. Now, I think I've given you time to think about a story. Maybe what favourite story would you reach for? And if you can't think of a printed story or one that you've learnt, it could be a little tale about your own child or anything like that. Just have a couple of minutes. Make sure that at the 1 minute mark when I do this, you swap over and give the other person a chance. Here we go. It could be, yeah. more minute. One more minute. It may be, who knows, it may be that if you talk to one of the board members, we could do a sort of book list that came out of today's convention with some of those favourite stories. A little word about reading versus telling. I say versus, there are some storytellers who regard using picture books as down there a bit, that's story reading. I use both, and I think both have different advantages. Looking, for example, at reading stories, there's a more direct association with the printed text. And if it's very young children and you're following the text with your finger, they're picking up the words as you say them. It enables a shared visual focus. You're all looking at that page together. Sometimes that helps concentration. And sometimes it means that pictures can augment the words. Andrew and I were talking about Rosie's Walk, a classic UK picture book where some of the stories throw through the text, some through the pictures, and you need to look at both to make the story work. It also involves an accurate repetition of the text. So bear in mind, if there are children near enough to see, they may well say, you missed that bit, if you do. It means you can read stories which you might not be able to read from memory if it's a longer story or if you're not feeling confident about remembering a story. It might allow a greater age range to take part because the pictures might hold the younger while the story in general works with the older children. It gives the opportunity for children to experience different artwork. It allows that extra dimension of book use. You know, looking at the cover first, I wonder what it'll be about. Maybe reading the blurb on the back, talking about the author, sometimes the illustrator. And that business of predicting before you turn the page, I wonder what he saw. Shall we turn over and see? And so that sort of stuff happens when you're using a book. It might introduce stories to children that are harder than their current reading level. I think many of us came across classic stories like Wind in the Willows if we were read to them, if they had been read to us. And it's good, I think, for teachers sometimes to read a little extract, if not more, of a story to remind children of the good things that's coming up when they get to read more fluently. And it means you can plan follow-up, if you want to, based on the text which you can easily see. Telling a story without a book means different things. It gives greater freedom to the teller. I can move about. I can come up close to you and invade your personal space. Because stories, you know, storytelling does that. I don't think in the UK that children have anything like enough experience of live things. They might go to the movies, they might watch TV, it's all, that's going to just go around whatever they do. I don't know how many children are taken, apart from maybe a one school visit, how many children are taken regularly to the theatre or the circus where things are live. But storytelling is, much of it, or certainly the sort that I do, is live. It's happening in front of you. The front row here don't quite know what's going to happen now. They're a bit worried. And they're not worried now, but these are worried. It's quite good, I think, for children to experience that crackle, that buzz, that unsureness, because you get that with a live performance. But also, telling from memory means that I can personalise a story. There were one or two asides in that story we just had, because you are an adult audience. I can lengthen it or shorten it. You don't know, do you, whether that was the long version, the short version, or what? It stimulates the imagination, because if I passed around a piece of paper and told you all to draw the man and the dog at the end, they would all be different. It allows me to use gestures. It enables you to share books when you have stories when you have no books to hand. Maybe you have a group of children out on the grass, or you want to tell them a story in a bus on their way to somewhere. It's good to have some stories up there. It also means you can have a large audience, because although I'm about to show you another picture book, a picture book with 200 people is very difficult to work. I wanted to show you a little bit about making stories interactive. This is A Shark in the Park, which some of you may know. And again, discussing the story before you start will start you talking about the shark. Here's the shark, by the way. You might also like to establish, and I like to do this when I'm working in other countries, some of the more difficult words first, to stop you having to pause so much in the middle of the story. So we can talk about this is the fin, and when you see the shark's fin coming, they all make that noise. Or maybe making sure that children know what this is. If I asked you to do a mime for a telescope, what would you do? Go on, show me. Very good. Oh, that's excellent. We've got some people doing one, we've got some people doing two, we've got some people focusing, which is excellent. If you're holding a book, you only have one hand spare. I was working in Jordan with a group of young people, deaf people, and we were talking about how you might sign a story, a picture book story, to a younger child. And I was explaining to this guy who does the sign language so well, because you may know that all countries, or most countries, have their own unique sign language. And I was saying that one way in which I would make this interactive is by adding the action. And I would do this. And the guy started laughing. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, well, in sign language in Jordan, that's the word for pervert. So maybe, choose the country carefully. Down at the park, a little boy is testing out his brand new toy. He's called Timothy Pope. Why do I know that? Because I've read the book first. It is absolutely essential, please. I know sometimes you will get a child saying, read this one. But if at all possible, look through, because then you will know the high points, you'll know the opportunities for joining in, as you will be again in a moment. Timothy Pope is looking through his telescope. He looks at the sky, he looks at the ground, he looks left and right, he looks all around. I could read it flat, like that. But if you get your telescopes out, perhaps you can help me. Are you ready? Timothy Pope is looking through his telescope. Are you ready to go up? He looks at the sky. Yes. He looks at the ground. He looks left. He looks right. He looks all around. And this is what he sees. Thank you for that, You've got to sound excited, and if the story is scary, you've got to sound scary. Your attitude, your expression's got to suit the story, which is why I sometimes do this, which is not good for books, but it means that I hold that back. You notice that I did left and right the other way around, because I treated you as children, and I thought it might be difficult for you to adapt, And this is what he sees. What a nasty surprise! In his loudest voice, Timothy cries, "There's a shark in the park!" This comes back, look. So obviously, they can all join in that refrain. "There's a shark in the park!" And sometimes I will act up a bit. I will, tease them. "Oh, is it going to be horrible? Is it a horrible shark?" And then get them to tell me that it's the cat's ear. Because it's like that point I mentioned before about impossible to go over the... I've got lots of time. Impossible to go over the top, and then the refrain again with the action. And then, and then maybe the guessing, is it a horrible shark, And there's only one more. It's a very short book, but it's got lots of ways of adding things, like actions, choruses, and so on. And the last one here. Come on, we can shout, "There's a shark in the park," couldn't we? "There's a shark in the park!" Reasonable. Oh, is it a horrible shark? Elvis is in the building. A shark? No, it's not. And aren't you glad? As a matter of fact, it's Timothy's dad. Now, listen, sorry, I keep looking at my wrist here. The fascinating thing about the sign language episode is because when you are signing something, my understanding is that someone signing has to find a little characteristic about somebody. And, people who sign, they're not worried about sounding rude. So they might say bald man or fat woman or whatever, just as a way of shorthand of describing a person. And the guy was a bit stumped for how to show this little boy. But he eventually found something which I had never found. He's got a tiny curl there. So that, it may not be the best sign in English, but that was his little sign for the boy. And so there are lots of ways in which the simple print on the page can be lifted off, and you can make that book interactive, or that story, like we did with Why Dog Lives with Man. With EFL, stories that you're in your work teaching English, I will be looking for fairly simple stories to start with, avoiding very complex language or wordplay initially, unless they're funny words. I do a story for very small children called Mr. Wiggly and Mr. Quigley. I just think those are nice words, Mr. Wiggly and Mr. Quigley. And amazingly, last year I got an envelope addressed to me which said Mrs. Quigley. There was a previous occupant of our house, apparently, who was called Quigley. I thought my stories had come home to roost. I would choose stories with a lot of interaction, because experiencing the story, particularly with children, helps that memory, helps that memorizing. Using body language, facial expressions, movement, use the space. Use a whiteboard or a flip chart. The reason I have this on is for two reasons, really. You could, if you wanted, put the key elements of the story first. You might write character names. It's sometimes easier to understand the words Timothy Pope if you were to write it out, in the same way that when you in your lovely Greek accents tell me your name, sometimes I have to look at your badge as well, because seeing it helps me pronounce it. And so that might be another reason you would use that. You might use it, put down any unusual words first. You might even use drawings to explain. I was working in Vietnam recently, and I was going to do a rhyme about a shark. And I said, "Do you know what a shark is?" And they looked a bit blank, like that, in fact. But all I had to do was that. And they knew. So it could be all sorts of reasons why it's a good thing, I think, to have something like this handy. It also means you can do a drawing story. Once upon a time there was a prince, and the prince lived in a castle. Here is the castle where the prince lived. Now the prince, I bet you wish you could draw like me, don't you? The prince, that's a joke by the way. The prince, he had everything he wanted. He had books to read, he had DVDs, He had computer games, he had X boxes, Y boxes, Z boxes, big plasma screens, But he was bored. So he thought, I know, I'll go outside for a walk. I'll get some exercise. I'll have some fresh air. There's a few morals there, look, if you want. So he walked out of the castle, he walked round the castle a bit, and then he just walked and walked and walked to see where he got to. And then he came to something which he'd never seen before, because he hadn't been out much. He came to a lake, and he thought, oh, I never knew this lake was here before. And it was a hot day, and there was nobody about. So he thought, oh, do you know, I really fancy a swim. So he, hang on, I'll just do the lake for you. So he took off his clothes, not all of them, obviously, kept on his royal pants, the ones with the fur round, dived in, had a lovely swim in the lake. Now, in the middle of the lake, there was an island, and the prince was a good swimmer, and he thought, hey, I bet I could get to that island. Kept swimming, got to the island, explored the trees, looked at the flowers, maybe. Perhaps he had a royal sandwich. I don't quite know how he got it over there, because if you swim with a sandwich, you go round and round, don't you? Maybe he had a special triangular sandwich pocket in his pants. Anyway, sorry, you're distracting me now. And then he swam back again. Now, hang on, I better just do the island. Here's the island in the middle of the lake. But with all that swimming, he was quite tired, because you get tired, don't you, when you've been swimming. And because he was tired, on the way back, he wasn't always looking where he was going, and sometimes, tripped over a rock. But in the end, he got back to the castle. But when he got back to the castle, he found that the door of the castle was locked, and he couldn't remember where he'd put his key. At this point, I would normally say, can you help me find his key? But I'm assuming that you might have noticed something. Some schools, they say, is he in his pocket? Is he on the island? Is it behind his ear? And I have to go, I wonder where his key might be. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked now. So that has a lot of uses. You might want to use a little of the home language. I know there are debates about this. But if I told a story about Juliana, maybe, and Juliana is going to visit her granny, sa grand-mère, and granny lives a long way away, maybe on a farm, you might like to add the odd word if it helps the story come to life. Because I think, never mind about the theory, if the occasion is right, and the understanding and the enjoyment is right, then you can pick up on any confusion later on. You might like to explain the story first. You might like to try that mixed language telling. You might like to tell the story straight away, maybe later the same day, maybe 2 days later, maybe next week. There is a theory about reading stories maybe 5 times, because that can get them really into the listeners' heads. You could even try multi-voice telling, getting the children to help you retell the story. Finally, holding children's interest. And I'm going to only tell you a little bit about this because I'm conscious that we're just finishing our time here. So I'm going to leave most of this to the workshop. But you can tell stories to yourself, maybe in a mirror, maybe on an audio, use your computer, maybe if you're feeling brave, a video of yourself. You could tell to your husband, wife, partner, cat, dog, whatever. I know this is slightly artificial because your husband or wife will not be able to behave like a small child, or maybe they will. You could tell to a neighbour's child or something. You could do a lot of this stuff before you tried it out with a class. If you're memorising it, read the story lots and lots of times. Maybe do a story map, or do a storyboard, like a little pictures, comic strip, perhaps, if that helps. Tell it in the car. Nobody will mind unless the car pulls up and the traffic light's next to you, and then they will notice that you're doing all this. But it's a quiet little world in your car. You can record it onto a CD with a gap between each sentence in the car so that you can come in once and you can chime in afterwards by repeating it and so on. So there are those sorts of ways. Remember, you will make mistakes. If you're very unsure, you could have the book on your lap to start with in case you have to look down. But I promise you, for those of you who don't tell many stories from memory, that you will soon become confident and those stories will go in and stay there. We could tell you so many more. I'm going to read you one more poem, if you forgive me, before we finish. And it involves more participation. What is this? No. Thank you very much. No. Sorry to treat you like young children. It'll all stop soon. You have very intellectual sessions next. Maybe you could say the name while I point. Here is the that smelled something sweet and led the search for a bite to eat. Here are the that followed the around the kitchen on 10 tiptoes. Here are the that looked high and low till they spotted 3 dishes all in a row. Here are the that reached up high to bring down a fresh baked blueberry pie. Here is the that opened up wide. And here are the that put pie inside. Here is the that licked the tin and lapped up the juice running down the chin. Here is the sorry, stomach, belly, tummy. Right, okay. In Yorkshire say belly. Here's the belly. Here is the belly that growled for more, and here are the that ran for the door. Here are the that heard a whack, and here is the bottom that fell to smack. Now, because we've finished our time, I'm going to leave it at that, but by way of finishing, I mean, I could talk about all the ways in which you can follow up stories, but I think as teachers you probably can guess a lot of those. Natural follow-up is wonderful. I told a story about a giant to some very young children. After that we had our break time, the children went outside and one of the teachers said, look, and they were reenacting it themselves by choice outside. That's lovely, that's natural, self-directed follow-up. Don't forget also simply talking about what you thought of it. What do you think? Oh, my favourite bit was that, you know. Oh, I was really scared and maybe jump, you know. And all that immediate reaction stuff. I'm very happy to get feedback of all kinds from the children I work with. And I'm going to close by showing you, or reading some of you, the feedback. There's some letters from children here. This is from a very posh school in Hertfordshire, in the south of England. So I'll have to do this in my posh voice. This little girl says, Dear M.R. Williams, not Mr. M.R., I like that. Dear M.R. Williams, thank you for the stories, I thought they were fabulous. It was the best part of my day. She finishes, thank you for coming to our school and wasting your time on us. This is, let's just get that. This is primary school child who said, Dear Mr. Williams, thank you for reading all those books. None could have done better. That's quite nice, you know, ringing endorsement. This is Matthew, an 11-year-old boy. He has a rather quaint writing style here. Dear Mr. Williams, I truly enjoyed your performance. You have a true talent. I especially like the Thursday poem. It had much laughter in it. You can be a professional if you keep it up. I think you've got quite a few fans after today. I think everybody jumped when you went, roar! I think it was worthwhile being there. Hope to see you soon, in the future, or sooner, he said. This is the last one. I'm sorry, I'm over it. This is the last one. I promise to stop after this. She's coloured it in, you can't see because it's a black photocopy. She says, you deserve to go on television. Anywhere but here. You are funnier than anyone could be. She goes on, if you have a wife, children and grandchildren, thank you Stacey, if you have a wife, children and grandchildren, they must pee themselves laughing at you. Now, I'm taking that as a compliment, right? I don't hear any different from you guys. So all I want to leave you is if you don't do much storytelling, do more. If you don't do any at all, please do some. But above all, enjoy that storytelling. Children will laugh usually with you rather than at you. And if they do laugh at you, come on, apart from a little tear-stained pillow that night, you get over it. It's worth it in the long run to bring them that joy and that learning that comes out of it by including more and more stories as much as you can in your English teaching lessons. Thank you for listening.